The bus stop sat on the edge of a forgotten street, half hidden beneath the flickering light of an old street lamp. Its glass shelter had long since gathered dust and scratches, with advertisements peeling off like old scabs. Most people hurried past without a second glance, the stop itself rarely serving more than an occasional passenger. Yet tonight, it became the stage for a quiet, human story. The lonely father had been walking home after another long shift. His jacket smelled faintly of machine oil, his shoes worn from years of standing, his face carved by lines of fatigue. Life had not been gentle with him. He was no stranger to hardship, having raised his child alone, balancing work and responsibility with the fragile thread of his own endurance. Still, beneath the tiredness lay a heart that hadn't lost its capacity to feel. It was there, at that almost abandoned stop, that he saw her. The girl sat slouched in her wheelchair, thin arms folded in her lap. Her clothes, though clean, were old and faded, carrying the air of someone who had not had the luxury of newness for a long time. She was young, perhaps 20, maybe less, but her eyes betrayed something older, the weary patience of someone who had already borne too much pain. The flickering streetlight illuminated the faint pallor of her skin and the slight trembling of her fingers resting against the metal armrest. For a moment, he thought she might be waiting for the bus. But the digital sign above blinked a cruel truth: the route had been suspended for the evening. No vehicle would be stopping there. And still, she waited. The father slowed his steps. Something about the sight pierced him. He could have walked on, many would have, but he didn't. He remembered nights when he himself had felt invisible, left on the edges of life with no one reaching out. He remembered his child's voice asking, "Papa, why don't people help each other anymore?" The girl's gaze was downcast, lost in her own silence, until the sound of footsteps drew her eyes upward. Their gazes met briefly. For her, it was a fleeting connection, like a candle flickering in the dark. For him, it was a spark that would not let him turn away. His thoughts raced. Who was she? Why was she here, alone, so late? Had her family abandoned her? Did she even have a family? Questions crowded his mind, but above them all rose one simple truth: she needed help. The bus stop's metal bench was empty beside her, yet she had chosen the wheelchair as both her prison and her survival. Her legs, wrapped in a blanket, did not move. The world had written her off as helpless, but he couldn't. He knew the weight of loneliness too well. The air grew colder as the night deepened. A gust of wind tugged at her thin sweater, and she shivered. He felt the sting of guilt, as if he were already too late, as if he had walked past hundreds like her before and only now stopped to see. He stood still for a moment, battling hesitation. What could he even offer? A stranger's kindness might frighten her, and yet, to do nothing would haunt him. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked gently, cautious not to startle her. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her eyes, though, spoke volumes. No, she wasn't waiting for anyone. She was just waiting. That truth, unspoken but clear, hit him harder than any words could. He exhaled slowly, his decision forming in that moment. He couldn't change the whole world. But maybe, just maybe, he could change hers. He took one step closer, his shadow mingling with hers under the dim streetlight. The world around them remained indifferent, cars rushing by, people passing without looking. But for the lonely father and the paralyzed girl, the bus stop became more than just a stop. It became a crossroad, where two broken paths were about to converge. The lonely father's heart urged him closer. Each step toward the girl felt like crossing an invisible line, one between strangers who pass without a word and souls who dare to recognize each other's pain. He wasn't sure how she would react. In today's world, kindness itself was often met with suspicion. Still, the compassion in his chest refused to let him turn away. The girl shifted slightly in her wheelchair as he approached. Her thin shoulders tightened, as if preparing to be ignored once again or perhaps pitied. She was used to stares, some curious, some cruel, but what she rarely encountered was genuine attention. That alone made her wary. The father stopped a respectful distance away. His voice was calm, almost hesitant. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the dim streetlight. There was no anger in them, no defensiveness, just exhaustion and a faint trace of fear. Her lips trembled before forming the softest reply, barely audible above the hum of the night traffic. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. He could see it in the way she clutched the blanket around her legs, in the quiet way her breath caught between words. He didn't press her. He knew too well how pride and dignity clung to those who had little else left. Instead, he offered a small smile, one that tried to reassure rather than invade. "You shouldn't be out here this late," he said gently. "The buses have stopped running." Her eyes flicked to the empty road, then back to him. For a brief moment, he thought she might explain why she was here, why she seemed so utterly alone. But she only lowered her gaze, as though the answer were too heavy to speak. The father felt a pang in his chest. He had lived through years when words were hard to come by, when silence had been his own shield against pity. He understood. So instead of asking questions, he simply took a step closer, lowering himself slightly so that his tired face was on her level. "There's a cafe not far from here," he said after a pause. "Warm, quiet. I was headed that way. Would you like to join me?" The girl blinked, startled by the offer. Strangers didn't invite her anywhere. Strangers either avoided her or threw her a coin as though she were a street beggar. An invitation to something as ordinary as a cafe was foreign to her. She searched his face for deception. All she found was sincerity, worn but steady, like a man who had carried his share of burdens and yet still believed in kindness. Still, fear tugged at her. What if he wasn't safe? What if this was just another cruelty disguised as charity? Her fingers tightened on the metal armrest. She wanted to say no, to stay in the bitter safety of solitude. But a small part of her, the part that remembered what hope felt like, kept her from refusing outright. The father noticed her hesitation. He didn't push. "It's okay if you'd rather stay," he added softly. "I just thought you might be cold." That simple acknowledgement, the way he left her a choice, chipped away at her fear. Most people tried to decide things for her, talking over her, assuming she was incapable. But this man, he asked. He offered. He waited. Her throat felt tight as she whispered, "Why?" He tilted his head slightly, puzzled. "Why what? Why would you stop?" she asked, her voice fragile. He thought for a moment. The truth came easily, though it surprised even him when he spoke it aloud. "Because I know what it's like to sit somewhere, waiting, and have no one see you." Those words struck her like a chord she had long forgotten how to play. Her chest tightened, and she looked away quickly, blinking against the sting in her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a burden, not as an inconvenience, but as a person. The father waited patiently, letting the silence rest between them. He knew she had a decision to make, and he would not rush her. He had learned from raising his own child that sometimes the hardest choices need the gentlest space. And so, beneath the flickering glow of that forgotten bus stop, a fragile bridge began to form between two lives. One built from loneliness, the other from compassion. Neither of them knew where it would lead, but for the first time that night, the possibility of a different tomorrow lingered in the air. The father crouched lower, his eyes steady and kind, his presence neither forceful nor hurried. The night around them was restless, cars in the distance, the occasional bark of a stray dog, the buzzing street lamp that flickered overhead. But in the fragile space between him and the girl, there was only quiet. She searched his face again, looking for cracks, for the faintest sign of hidden motives. Life had taught her to be careful. Too many promises had broken before they were even offered properly. Yet here was this tired-looking man, speaking gently, waiting for her answer as if it truly mattered. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, a small sigh escaped, carrying with it the weight of years unspoken. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but she knew one thing: she was tired of being invisible. The father could sense her struggle. He softened his tone, as though speaking to a wounded bird. "You don't have to decide right now," he murmured. "I only wanted to let you know you don't have to sit here alone." His words carried something she hadn't heard in a long time: permission to matter. Something shifted in her eyes, hesitation wrapped in a fragile thread of hope. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she finally whispered, "Come with me." It was barely audible, more like a plea than an answer. But it was enough. The father's heart swelled, not with triumph, but with responsibility. He nodded once, firmly, as if sealing an unspoken promise. "Of course," he said softly. "I'll be right here." Carefully, he reached for the handles of her wheelchair, pausing before touching them. "May I?" he asked. Her gaze dropped to her lap. No one had ever asked her that before. People usually assumed they had the right to push, to move, to control. His question was more than courtesy, it was respect. Slowly, she nodded. The father's hands wrapped around the cold metal, steady and sure. He adjusted his grip, mindful of her comfort, then gently began to wheel her forward. The wheels creaked softly against the pavement, breaking the silence of the empty street. The girl sat tense at first, her fingers curled against the blanket covering her legs. Every movement reminded her that she was surrendering control, placing her fate in the hands of a stranger. Fear whispered cruel doubts in her mind. What if he hurt her? What if this was a mistake? But with each step, those doubts were met by the steady rhythm of his stride, the quiet calm of his presence. They moved past the dim bus shelter, leaving behind its shadows. The night air carried a sharp chill, but as they walked together, she felt something else creeping in, an unfamiliar warmth. After a while, she gathered enough courage to ask, "Why are you alone?" The question startled him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the ground, his face briefly clouded by memory. Finally, he said, "Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes people leave. Sometimes, we just end up carrying what's left." His voice was quiet, but the weight of it settled deeply in her chest. She understood, even without details. She too carried losses that had shaped her silence. For a moment, the girl's fear gave way to something gentler. She wasn't the only broken one here. He glanced at her again, catching her eyes. "But I believe," he continued slowly, "that even broken paths can lead us somewhere new. If we're not afraid to walk them together." The girl's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her that way, as though her future was still worth something, as though she wasn't a burden but a companion. Her eyes glistened under the streetlight, and though she said nothing, her silence this time was different. It wasn't the silence of despair, it was the silence of someone daring, just barely, to believe. As they continued toward the faint glow of the cafe down the street, the father pushed the wheelchair with gentle steadiness, and the girl sat a little straighter, her fear slowly loosening its grip. That night, beneath a cold sky and a flickering light, two souls began their quiet journey together, one step, one turn of the wheel at a time. The cafe came into view at the end of the street, its warm yellow light spilling out through wide windows. Inside, shadows of people moved in small groups, cups steaming in their hands, laughter occasionally bursting into the quiet night. To the girl, it looked like another world, one she had watched from a distance but rarely stepped into. A place where people belonged, where conversations filled the air instead of silence. The father slowed his steps as they neared the entrance. He could feel her tension building with every turn of the wheelchair's wheels. Her body stiffened, her hands clutching the blanket tighter, her breath uneven. To him, it was a familiar look, the look of someone standing at the edge of something frighteningly new. He stopped just short of the door. "We don't have to go in if you're not ready," he said softly, leaning slightly so she could hear him above the murmur of the street. Her head turned slowly, eyes wide with conflict. The smell of coffee and pastries drifted toward her, warm and inviting, but her mind filled with doubts. What if people stared? What if they whispered? What if she was nothing more than a burden, even here? Her silence stretched, heavy and trembling. The father didn't rush her. He rested his hands gently on the handles of her wheelchair, steady, patient, like an anchor against the tide of her fear. He remembered nights when he had stood frozen at similar doors, wondering if he would be turned away. He knew the weight of hesitation. "You don't owe me anything," he said after a moment. "We can stay out here. Or I can take you anywhere else you want to go. The choice is yours." Those words struck her deeply. Choice. It was a luxury she had been denied more often than granted. Most people decided for her, where she could sit, what she could eat, how she should live. But here, this stranger was offering her control. Her chest ached with the unfamiliarity of it. Her lips parted, but all that came out was a shaky whisper, "I'm afraid." The father crouched beside her so they were eye to eye. "That's all right," he said, his voice steady and warm. "Being afraid doesn't mean you have to stay behind. Sometimes being afraid is just the first step to something new." She blinked rapidly, fighting the sting of tears. For so long, fear had been her cage. Yet now, this man's words cracked its bars. Her hand, trembling, shifted on her lap. She didn't speak, but the faintest nod gave him her answer. The father rose and opened the door with one hand, gently guiding her inside. A small bell jingled as they entered. The warmth hit them immediately, wrapping them in comfort the cold street had stolen. The girl's eyes darted around, her heart racing. She noticed the wooden tables, the shelves lined with books and pastries, the steam rising from mugs. But what she feared most, people staring, did not happen the way she imagined. A few glanced at her briefly, then returned to their conversations. Some smiled politely. No one mocked, no one whispered cruelly. The father steered her toward a quiet corner, away from the crowd, and helped her settle at a small table by the window. He moved with gentle respect, careful not to draw unwanted attention. When he sat across from her, the girl realized something had shifted. The bus stop had felt like an ending, lonely, forgotten. This place, however, felt like the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. The father smiled softly, his tired eyes kind. "See, we made it." She managed the smallest smile in return, fragile but real. For the first time in a long while, she felt more than just the weight of her paralysis. She felt possibility. And though her fears hadn't vanished, though doubts still clung to her heart, there was now something stronger stirring beneath them, the faint but undeniable seed. The cafe was quiet in the corner where they sat, the hum of conversation blending with the clinking of cups. A waitress approached with a kind smile, setting menus down without hesitation or pity. To the girl, even that simple gesture felt extraordinary. She wasn't invisible here, nor was she treated like a burden. She was just a customer. The father ordered tea for himself and, after a gentle pause, asked her what she'd like. She hesitated, unused to the question, unused to being given the freedom to choose. Finally, almost shyly, she murmured, "Hot chocolate." "Hot chocolate it is," he said warmly, as if her choice mattered as much as any grand decision in life. When the drinks arrived, the rich aroma filled the air between them. The girl wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. For the first time that night, she felt anchored, not to a place of abandonment, but to a moment of shared humanity. They sipped quietly at first, silence stretching like a soft blanket. But this silence was different from the one at the bus stop. It wasn't heavy with loneliness, it was gentle, alive with possibility. The father studied her face, seeing not just the frailty but also the resilience hidden beneath it. "Do you live near here?" he asked carefully. Her eyes flickered downward. "Not really. I stay where I can." He understood without needing details. Life had scattered her roots, left her adrift. He didn't press, sensing that her story was stitched with pain not easily shared. Instead, he said softly, "I see." For a long moment, she stared at him, her lips tightening as if holding back words. Finally, she asked the question that had haunted her since he first spoke to her, "Why did you stop?" He leaned back, letting the steam from his tea rise between them. His gaze drifted toward the window, where city lights blurred in the night. "Because once," he said slowly, "someone stopped for me. When I thought no one ever would. If they hadn't, I don't know where I'd be today. Maybe I just wanted to pass that forward." Her breath caught. There was no performance in his words, no pity, just truth. Something inside her cracked open then, not with pain, but with release. She had spent years waiting for help that never came, for someone to notice, for a hand to reach toward her instead of away. And now, here he was, not promising miracles, not offering charity, but giving her what she had craved most, dignity and presence. Her eyes glistened, and she whispered the words that had been waiting on her tongue since the bus stop, "I don't want to go back there." The father leaned forward, his expression steady but tender. "Then don't," he said. "Come with me." Her heart skipped, fear and hope colliding. "But, why would you want me to?" "Because no one should face this world alone," he answered simply. "And because I believe you deserve more than an empty bus stop in the dark." The tears she had tried so hard to hold back finally slipped down her cheeks. Not the tears of despair she knew so well, but tears of something she had almost forgotten how to feel, hope. She nodded slowly, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Okay." The father reached across the table, not to grab her hand, but to rest his own nearby, an invitation, not a demand. After a trembling pause, she placed her small hand over his. In that moment, the cafe around them faded. It didn't matter what tomorrow would bring, whether it would be hard or uncertain. What mattered was this: two broken lives had found each other, and together, they had chosen not to remain alone. When they finally rose to leave, the father moved behind her chair again, steady and patient. As he pushed her gently toward the door, the little bell above it jingled, not like an ending, but like the start of a story neither of them had expected. Outside, the night was still cold, but for both of them, it no longer felt empty. Dash dash dash.